Hello and welcome from the Scottish Youth Film Foundation. And today is unfortunately, the last broadcast from the Festival of Politics 2024.
That's right. And today we are starting off with the big one. We are interviewing Quintin Oliver. Quintin Oliver is a conflict and resolution specialist with Stratagem International. He has done some really interesting work in Northern Ireland over the years. And Quintin, I was hoping you could actually start us off by introducing your contribution to the Good Friday Agreement, kind of maybe in short what they are, how you campaigned as yes for the agreement, and what you learned from it in regards to the role of discourse in mediating conflict.
Yes, Northern Ireland was seen as a religious conflict, Catholics versus Protestants, but it wasn't. It's about power, identity, nationality. Are we British or are we Irish? And the conflict was fierce for 30, 40 years, or 800 if you want to look back into history. And it was then negotiated through the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, which was seen as an act of genius because it settled a lot of the problems and got agreement from all the parties, including the armed groups and including the British state, the Irish state, and those of us who lived in Northern Ireland. So my job was to persuade people to vote for this deal, but the deal had been conducted more or less in private. It was 20,000 words of civil service jargon and diplomatic ambiguities. And so in campaigning terms, it was important to pitch it as, is your future for peace and agreement with the other side, or is it to continue violence, war and conflict? And we won the vote in a huge turnout of over 80% by 72% of the vote.
And what did that teach you about the role of media and of appealing to people's certain interests regarding the role of discourse?
It was really important for me to understand that you had to engage people. It wasn't enough to tell them. It wasn't enough to say, our politicians have done a deal, you must support it. You had to explain and you had to understand what were their fears, what would happen to the prisoners. Would the prisoners be released? Would they go back to violence? Would there be reconciliation? How would we learn how to talk to and integrate with the other side because we were largely in two communities? So it taught me a lot about listening and about exploring issues. You couldn't just say clause 35 has determined that this is the solution. You had to unpick clause 35 and explain what was happening and win people to understand it and support it, or at least to tolerate it.
Quintin was just at a panel discussing this in more depth. And Quintin, in this panel, I remember you described violence itself as a form of communication. Could you expand a bit more upon that, especially given the realm of modern media and modern discourse?
Indeed, it's too easy, I've learned, to say, oh, people who use violence, that's dreadful. They must be psychopaths, they must be thugs, they must be gangsters, they must be trying to win a drugs war, or they're tilting against a windmill by demanding ridiculous things. But it is important to explore why are they doing this, because this is a form of communicating. They're angry, they're frustrated, they feel they're not being heard. Now, sometimes they may be wrong, and they may be a terrorist group that has no base and no support, but often there is a kernel of truth. There are nuggets of grievances that they are articulating, and that's where you need to explore and see if those can be dealt with in order to satisfy some of their demands, if all of them are not possible.
And so moving to the conflict where this form of communication and negotiation is prevailing right now, I mean the Ukrainian situation. There is a big issue right now there because there is an ability to hold the presidential elections in Ukraine, which is one of the main signs of democracy. And what does that mean for Ukrainian democracy right now and on the international arena?
Yes, it's obviously ultra difficult when there is war, when there is armed conflict by armies with tanks and aircraft and artillery. And that is very, very difficult. And democracy in that setting is hard. Now, it is possible to hold elections during wars. It has been done in many countries, but sometimes it's chosen to suspend it, and that may be for good reasons, or it may be for less good reasons, that those in power want to stay in power and don't want to subject themselves to the people's verdict. But what can be done, regardless of whether that's right or wrong, not to hold the election, what can be done is to deepen democracy in the local councils, in the municipalities, in the service providers, in the NGOs and campaigners across Ukraine, obviously in different settings in the east from the west, and depending on where they are. It's possible to deepen democracy and to prepare people for the time when the war is lessened and where a talks process, a negotiation process, it's possible to begin because people will need to be conscious of it. And looking back on our negotiations in 1998 in Northern Ireland, there was very little public participation. And in one sense, it conforms to what the academics called an elite accommodation. The two governments, Britain and Ireland, the Americans were supportive, the Europeans were supportive, and the 10 political parties were elected to the talks process. But the public participation was very little. So now we know more about that, and where there is strong public participation, it can make it easier to implement a peace agreement, and it will last for longer.
That's very true, Quintin. And I believe, as Elise and I have produced a video going into more detail on this subject. We will now cut to that. Healthy discourse is crucial to the state of liberal democracy. The maintenance of truth, the dedication to truth, fends off nefarious politics. However, there is trouble afoot.
Post-truth politics is politics that doesn't care if it's fact or fiction. A good example of this is Vladimir Putin's Russia.
Unlike the Soviet Union, whose violence-backed discourse and propaganda facilitated an alternative, more prosperous and glorious reality totally at odds with how things actually were, a lie, Putin's Russia facilitates instead a total disinterest in politics and truth themselves, a resignation to the lines between truth and otherwise being too far gone to discern, nullifying truth, not opposing it. Coincidentally, Donald Trump's rhetorical modus operandi follows suit. The false Taylor Swift endorsement or the communist Kamala Harris rallies, coupled with his aptitude for using irony and humor as a shield, speak to a disinterest in truth in the name of forwarding political ambitions.
For example, the Southport riots that took place in this country, in which online conspiracy theories fanned the flames into once-in-a-decade levels of political violence.
The dissemination of misinformation spread truthless but evocative bases for the Southport tragedy to spur on violent demonstration as well as an unhealthy shift in the way we conduct ourselves politically. Battles of ideas replace battles of violence. Powerful debates can stem the tide of powerful weapons, but post-truth discourse weakens our collective trust in these ideas and their ability to protect us from the gnashing claws of what lurks behind the shiny veneers of liberal democracy.
That was a fascinating video, Sal, I must say. And in today's heated political climate, it's easier than ever to sleep from reasonable discourse into violence. And from your research, from your perspective now, an interview, do you think social media has a big role to play in destabilizing our conversations?
Well, I see social media as a contributor to volatility, for better or for worse. Now, of course, people are quick to add that some volatility may be needed to shake up some less than ideal status quo, but at the end of the day, what social media accomplishes is it allows information to diffuse into general consciousness on a scale of speed and sheer mass never before witnessed. And so for these reasons, although it does have its benefits, I think it has ultimately been a force that has led to political polarization, political violence, of course, and given spaces to people who may be agents of these things.
Yeah, I agree with you. And as members of Gen Z, we were born and raised in a digital world. And how both of you think, Santi, Sal, how hopeful are you about the role of internet in our lives?
Pass it on to you first.
Of internet?
Yes.
Ooh. Well, I mean, the internet is good for certain things. It's good for this. It's good for connecting yourself with other people across the world. However, am I confident that the internet is something that is completely innocent? No, I'm not. I'm worried about I'm regularly worried about scams and deep fakes, which we'll be getting onto later, and what else the internet can achieve.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are largely to do with the centralization of the internet, which seems to be an ever-increasing issue. I mean, either way you look at it, just the sheer amount of communication it enables, whether it's centralized or not, is going to cause some problems. However, I do think the age of the Wild West internet is probably long dead at this point, but it's certainly not even reminiscent in the current net-based world. And so I don't really know. I guess I could see it going either way, but I think ultimately the mass communication aspect of the internet is and has proven to be a crucial component of modern political dialogue.
Also, in preparation for the Festival of Politics, all of us has been tasked to prepare a film, a project on a local issue. And as I'm from Ukraine, I made my film on the topic about peace negotiations and prospects for mediators for the conflict which is prevailing right now in my country. And let's watch the video, the film that I've worked on. As Ukraine is going through the third year of Russia's full-scale invasion, neither of sides appear close to a decisive military victory. Immediate prospects for a peace plan and ceasefire are slim, with both sides holding firm on their conflicting demands. However, the groundwork for future negotiations has already been laid, with key issues remain clear.
Russia is they are as a self-interested actor as you will ever see on the world stage. Nothing is by accident. Everything is, I think, designed to best achieve what they consider to be success. I'm not sure that we know what success is to Putin.
The only viable model for negotiations for the Russian president would be a trilateral agreement with intermediaries. Similar arrangements were made for a grain deal issue.
Ultimately, it's got to be somebody who neither party trusts completely. I think there is something to be said for if both sides hate you, then you're probably doing something right. I think the U.S. is too aligned with Ukraine to be an acceptable peace negotiator here. I can't imagine the global community would allow Hungary or Turkey to play a role. I mean, why don't we invite North Korea to get in there? I think it's got to be a different kind of state actor, one that doesn't necessarily have all of its eggs in one basket or the other, a little more of a neutral party. I can tell you with a lot of confidence that it won't be the U.S. It might not be any single state actor. It might be a coalition. It might be a NATO or a coalition of countries. That's the hardest part, is to get somebody to sit at the table and be the mediator. That is maybe the most important part of the negotiation, is agreeing on one person who doesn't represent one side more than the other.
Kyiv is working on the detailed and clear plan to end the war and achieve the peace by the end of November 2024. It should happen before the second Global Peace Summit.
Well, the most likely outcome will be one that no one is terribly happy with. Ukraine will obviously want its to be fully restored to its original borders. The Russians will want to give up as little as humanly possible. I think the most likely outcome is that it will be something in between, where Ukraine gets back most but not all of its territory. Russia will lay claim to the part that they consider most valuable, and will probably not end up with that, but with something else. But that then becomes part of the strategy. How how do you kind of fake them out? You know, we want this, but actually we want this. So if we offer them that, they'll clearly say no, and then we'll get this. I think, unfortunately, the outcome will be, though, that Ukraine will not be made whole. As an American, that makes me sad.
Here at Independence Square, surrounded by thousands of small flags that symbolize the fallen Ukrainian defenders. Each flag bears the name and date of death of a hero, serving as a poignant reminder of the terrible price of the freedom. This powerful display underscores the urgent need to end the ongoing conflict in the heart of Europe.
What a powerful and emotional video made by Juliana. Our thoughts are with everyone in Ukraine at this time. So Juliana, a lot of Scottish people are obviously concerned about Ukraine, even if the war hasn't been as much on the news cycle. How has your experience been for you and your family and where you live in Ukraine?
To be fair, I'm really lucky to be from the most western part of Ukraine. That's why we didn't really experience the war that people experience in the east and in the central part of Ukraine. That's why I've been lucky not to hear all the bombs at the beginning and all the attacks been going on since the 3 years ago. And yeah, my family is all right, but I'm here and I'm really honored to be here, having this opportunity to study here, to be here, to be in the safety and to feel better until my country is better, and then I can come back and help to rebuild and to help my country.
Yeah, and stay hopeful about it. Do you think, like relating back to Sal's film, do you think that social media is playing an important role in the war for freedom for Ukraine?
Of course, the social media, it's been like one of the main power Ukrainians had since the beginning of the full-scale invasion and even before, because this is a way how other people abroad can see the truth and how other people can react and other people can know what's going on in country and who is invading whom. And also the social media can play a negative role because as we all know, the Russian propaganda machine has been prevailing over lots of territories, not only inside of Russia but beyond. And so we need to have media really big literacy and big awareness of fakes and social media fake informational sources and not to be affected and to be misled by it.
And relating to like fake stuff on social media, you were looking at deep fakes, Santi?
That's correct. So moving on to my individual film. So, with deepfakes of Keir Starmer, the Health Secretary Wes Streeting, and even deepfakes now of Taylor Swift and Kamala Harris in the last week, it's fair to say that deepfake politics is a pressing issue in modern politics, and it's here to stay. I caught up with Hannah Perry and Robert Moran, two of the key speakers and experts on the deepfake politics panel at the Festival of Politics, to see what the future holds. I'm joined here today by Robert Moran from Brunswick Group and Hannah Perry from Demos, who are two experts in deepfake technology as well as the political world. Hello to both of you. What is a deepfake?
So a deepfake can be an image, it can be an audio recording, it could be a video, which has been created or manipulated by AI, generative AI, in a way that misrepresents something or someone.
I guess the only other thing to add is just that there are many now commercially publicly available deepfake generators online that anybody could use.
How long is it until deepfakes are a part of our ordinary life.
There are lots of people who, particularly actresses or musicians, especially women, who have already been deepfaked and may not be aware of it. So there are lots of deepfakes, non-consensual deepfakes that already proliferate, particularly on pornographic websites, sadly, that are readily available. So this is something that is already affecting many of us in ways that we may not even be aware of.
I want to talk to you about Lincoln 2.0.
Okay.
Obviously, for those who aren't aware, this is an article that Robert Moran originally published in the Huffington Post, if I'm not mistaken, about a group of Silicon Valley, people involved in Silicon Valley getting together and creating an AI version of Abraham Lincoln and standing him up for office in the presidential elections. My question to you is this. As the author of that article, which has turned into a novel, how long do you think it will take until a number of candidates get together and actually do this? Because, of course, Charlie Brooker, who the creator of Black Mirror is, has regularly predicted advances in technology in a similar way. So I want to hear your perspective on that.
So it's a fun question. So in the UK, there's a fellow running for, or standing for Parliament that I think said he wanted to have an AI avatar be the candidate or the representative. In the US, you have a mayoral race where a citizen is attempting to put an AI on the ballot as for mayor. And so you're starting to see sort of interesting versions of this. My theory is that it will first be that you'll first see this as almost a publicity stunt where people will try doing it, but it will get better and better, and then somebody will try to do it for real. So in the book, it was a bunch of political consultants team up with a tech billionaire who has the money, and they all have different motives, but they decide to go do it. And to make history because they want to be the first to really do it. So I said it in the near future, right where we're at the doorstep of strong AI, because I thought that was the most likely scenario where it would actually be really super compelling, where the imagery and also the advancements would be there to make it something that people would sort of step back and be impressed by.
Well, that was some fantastic work, Santi. Can I ask how it was speaking to Hannah Perry and Robert Moran?
It was a bit of an eye-opener, I must admit. Robert Moran's book sounds absolutely fascinating. I'm definitely picking up a copy when we're all finished up with this.
Perhaps a good Christmas read?
Oh, definitely. I have no idea where you get it, so I can't exactly plug it. But
well, could you remind us the name of it for the audience?
The name of the book is Lincoln 2.0, and that is by Robert Moran. You can find the article, which is a shortened edition, on the Huffington Post.
And hopefully it'll be in bookstores soon for your Christmas presents. On a brighter topic, I understand you had the chance to make a film about climate change yesterday. Is that correct?
That is correct. I caught up with 3 members of the Not the End of the World panel yesterday.
Could you tell us a wee bit of what that's about?
So, the Not the End of the World panel aims to look at radical solutions to the climate crisis. It looks at it from a more positive outlook that this obviously isn't the end of the world and that the crisis can be rectified.
Oh, well, for a little bit of optimism, let's watch that film right now.
In an increasingly environmentally conscious world, politicians, businesses, and scientific experts worldwide are faced with a climate emergency and are working to find pragmatic solutions to a complex issue. The Festival of Politics will be delving deeper into these solutions in their Not the End of the World discussion panel. The panel aims to look at radical solutions, such as new technologies and social transformation. Mike, you were talking about polarisation in the climate debate, and that was something that you've noticed increasingly over the years. What do you feel the next steps are to neutralise that debate and ensure that people don't feel so polarised or so divided?
The reason polarisation is an issue is when things are only championed by a very small minority. they don't necessarily become mainstreamed. And we need action on climate change to be mainstreamed. And a good example, actually, if you look at the climate legislation in Scotland, it was cross-party. Even the 2019 targets, which are about to be slightly withdrawn, some of them are, that was actually cross-party. The only party that didn't agree with them was the Greens, who wanted them to go further. So that it is really important that actually we get the body of people behind the change that's needed. And I don't think you do that by marginalising the debate. So the problem with polarisation is a lot of people who want to caricature people that care about the environment in a particular way, and that isn't helpful.
Obviously, a question was posed to you by a young person asking about their diet, and there are a couple of other questions asking about lifestyle, and also the use of drama and education to convey this message. Would you say that these are all good signs that we're starting to make those positive steps in your respective fields?
We already know some solutions, and I think we need to be very clear about these solutions, what we can do already. And sometimes they're quite straightforward, and either people can do it themselves at home, and like I was talking about diets, and one of the main things we can do is look at our food waste. Sometimes not simply eating so much. We are on average eating too many calories, really, and then we're eating perhaps some of the wrong calories, and that could be, we could try to eat a little bit less meat. I don't say we all have to become vegetarian, there's no need for that, but we could eat less discretionary foods that are not necessarily good for you, but still have quite a carbon footprint, for example. And it's getting that information out to people in a way that people trust us, right? They say, oh yeah, that makes sense, actually, that's something I can do something with.
I mean, I think that there's so much noise sometimes that I think a lot of people just switch off, and debates that are as polarised as, you know, what to eat or how to behave in certain aspects, people just switch off, and that's part of the problem. We need to, you know, take the heat out of the climate debate, if you like, and get to some of these points that I think we've discussed in the panel today, which is about all the other benefits that we would have from doing things like insulating our homes, from eating more vegetables, from sitting less in our cars, and all these things that would be, you know, really good for a lot of people. That, you know, there's a lot of climate action that is not about what individuals do, but is about what big business does or governments. So, you know, it's keeping all of those things alive at the same time, I think.
The problem we have, and this, back to this polarisation, is that there's a tendency to scandalise everything in order to get a headline, whether that's in the printed press or whether that's in social media. You know, scandal works best. It grabs your attention. You know, the meme that broke the internet or whatever. You know, I've heard that so many times. It should be broken by now, and it's still running, I'm sure. So, but it is that issue. How do you actually get these spaces where the people who understand the issue, who've studied the issue, are actually getting listened to and helping inform that progress, instead of allowing ourselves to be sort of pulled to pillar and post by just whatever daily scandal we happen to have this week. So.
That's perfect. Panel, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for that, Santi. Having watched your video, I guess the natural thing to do is now ask how you feel about climate change.
Well, I feel slightly more positive knowing that there are experts out there that are dedicating time to think about radical solutions. What concerns me is that, well, like actually many people on the panel yesterday, what concerns me is that politics hasn't quite caught up yet. What with emissions targets being met on these, such as the ZEV mandate, being moved from 2030 to 2035. That did concern me. And yeah, there is obviously, as I mentioned yesterday in my Shawlands film, there is a conflict between sustainable growth and big business. And we really need to work hard to combat that.
Yeah. So I'm from the Highlands, and having a close relationship with nature up there has a pretty positive effect on your well-being. But is that the same where you're from?
Well, funny enough, I have a family member who was suggested that the best form of therapy was going out for a walk in nature. And my dad is a very big advocate of that. He finds going out for walks in the hills or going out for walks in nature really help him to de-stress and calm down. And I echo his sentiments on that one. And there's nothing I love more than a nice long walk. Gets your steps in, and yeah, you get to explore new routes, find new tunnels.
You, Amber?
Yeah, in my interview with Tajesh Mistry, he talks a lot about like nature and the benefits of just going outside, like for your mental health. It is really beneficial, and I would definitely say that for me, like in my local town, whenever I go out, you just feel better.
Yeah. So yesterday, Amber got the chance to interview Grace McCabe, a spokesperson for the Young Women's Movement, about women's involvement in the Parliament. Let's watch that interview now.
So today I'm here with Grace McCabe, who's been a member of the Young Women's Movement for a couple of years now. So what made you join the Young Women's Movement and get more involved in gender equality?
So I have been in girl guiding since I was 5, and one of my mum's really good friends was a lead volunteer at Girl Guiding Scotland, and they were running a programme, and she thought I should join it. We did things like create campaigns that got motions in the Scottish Parliament. I got to meet the First Minister, and then I eventually became lead volunteer of that programme. The Young Women's Movement, there's a lot of overlap between, we all kind of really work to give young women and girls a voice. So when I saw they were recruiting for the advisory panel, I just thought, okay, that is a charity that really aligns with me.
And what's been your favourite project that you've worked on so far?
My favourite project ever that I've worked on was with Girl Guiding Scotland to create the Own Our Zone campaign, which led to me getting a nomination from the United Nations for my work to promote safe spaces for girls and young women. And the best part of that was that I got to lead a team of 20 young people, and we got to do it together. So that was really great.
Mm-hmm. And in the panel, you said that young women often have a fear of being silly, not taken seriously enough. How have you yourself battled with this, and is it something that you still think about?
I was 15 when I started off doing things like this. But I definitely was never ever taken seriously. I also look quite young, and people would dismiss me when I was just trying to express my views or say that I was causing a fuss. And I think that kind of comes down to the idea that women should be seen and not heard, and they don't really like a woman that disrupts the norm. But the thing that's helped the most is the support I get from organisations like the Young Women's Movement, because we've all been through it together.
You said a lot of your kind of education into politics, you found a safe space outside of school. So, do you think that schools should be adding more into their curriculum for young women and men really to get into politics?
Yeah, I think so. Not even just getting into politics, but it's the fact that modern studies is an elective subject that you don't take until you're a little bit older, but politics affects every single aspect of our lives, especially for young women. Every right we have has been fought through political institutions. So I even think it should be incorporated into PSC. And then quite often, I think debates, etc. at school that concern politics can be quite partisan, quite party politics heavy, whereas really we just need to know who is doing the work to promote our rights and how we can support them.
Finally, what are your thoughts on the rise in incel culture and misogyny, and what can we as a society do to battle that?
Yeah, it's really scary. My dissertation focuses quite heavily on this. I do think the law has a role to play. I like that misogyny is now being treated as domestic terrorism, because it is. And terrorism is a really scary word, but we need to show people that potentially aren't being affected by misogyny that is how bad it is. We have to have an absolute zero tolerance policy. We have to have parents not afraid to check what their young their sons are doing online, and find help for those boys when signs of aggression do start showing. And more than anything, we have to see women as people. A woman being killed by a partner isn't kind of given the same merit as if a murder happened on the street. So I think the law needs an overhaul in that sense.
Yeah, definitely. That's all the questions I've got for you, so
Thank
thank
you
you very much.
That was a fantastic interview with Grace McCabe. Thank you very much, Amber. Opportunities for young women in Scottish politics have gone overlooked for far too long, so it's great that you're able to shed some light on the issue. To the both of you, do you think, having attended the Festival of Politics in the Scottish Parliament, you might be more inclined inclined to engage in the world of politics in future?
I think for me it definitely will, because seeing some of the panels you don't realise just how much falls under politics. You know, like politics is everything. Like before I came here, you know, I had a different view of it, whereas after seeing some of it, you know, you realise all the different areas you can go into. So I think, yeah.
And yourself, Sophie?
Yeah, I agree. Politics is way more diverse than I thought it was, and there's a lot more that falls into my area of interest rather than just people like yelling at each other in a room. So, yeah.
Have you both enjoyed the Scottish Parliament as a space to work within?
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting to look at some of it.
I think a lot of people would say that.
Well, like to.
Perfect. Well, today the Festival of Politics hosted a panel on incel politics. Sophie, you spoke to Dr. Sophie King-Hill and Claire Duffy, the event's panellists, about their area of expertise. So let's watch that interview now.
Incel ideology is on the rise. Teachers and students alike are reporting aggressive, misogynistic and hateful behaviours from younger and younger pupils. Radicalisation can be hard to detect until it's reached extremes, meaning that many people are under-equipped to prevent and intervene. Incels, involuntary celibates, are an online subculture consisting of people who define themselves as undesirable and blame, objectify and denigrate girls and women as a result. Incel communities became notably more extremist in the 2000s, with the encouragement of extremist posts on sites like Reddit and 4chan. In 2014, 22-year-old Elliot Rodger killed 6 people and injured 14 others by gunshot stabbing and vehicular ramming before killing himself in Isla Vista, California. Beforehand, Rodger had uploaded a YouTube video where he outlined his plan and motives and spread a manifesto to those close to him. His motive? He wanted to punish women for rejecting him. Such sentiments are a fundamental and glorified aspect of incel culture. In fact, to do an ER is an incel slang term meaning that they'd like to commit a similar hateful act. A lot of incel jargon has, very recently, been introduced into mainstream media slang amongst the youth online, albeit mostly diluted. Neat, looksmaxing, mogging and chad are used outside of the incel sphere, whereas more vulgar and hateful terms like femoid, LDAR, AWLAT and tic tacs remain obscure. But how and why are young people, young boys in particular, being exposed to incel culture? Obviously, the internet. It has been suggested that, on YouTube, a user is only 5 videos away from watching incel propaganda after watching a normal video. In addition, teenagers often feel socially isolated, leading them to be vulnerable to extremist groups like incels. Today I spoke to Dr. Sophie King-Hill and Claire Duffy. I have a baby brother. He's 13 years old, and despite the normal sibling gripes I have with him, that he never shuts the door, he is not bad. He's fairly decent, I would say. And despite that, it is really easy to be radicalised, and it's hard to notice it until it's really extreme. So is there something families can do, conversations they can open to prevent this?
Prevention is a big word, but I think it's a day-to-day practice of listening to your children and talking to them and opening up that opportunity for them to talk about what it is that they're experiencing online. I've got a 9-year-old son. He's pretty decent too, I like to think. And we talk about what he's doing online all the time. And then sometimes if I'm looking after him and some of his friends, I'll quite often ask them, what's kind of like the most popular thing at the moment that they're seeing online. And we've talked about Chads and we've talked about Sigma. And it's quite extraordinary how much, and alpha males and all sorts of things. Like even at 9, it's amazing how much language, incel language, they are being exposed to.
So I think first and foremost, it's keep the dialogue open. Always make sure there's a safe space for him to come and talk to one of you about things he might have read, things he might have seen, and to kind of have that security with someone, that's invaluable for a young man or a boy, to be able to go to someone and say, I've seen this online, or I've read this online, and I'm not sure what to make of it, or, it sounds quite damaging, or it makes me uncomfortable. But communication is key, and also be led by them. So instead of, and like I said, you're obviously a lot younger than me. I'm 44 now. I know nothing of the online world that young people exist in, but we have to listen to them. But it has to be valid listening. It can't be tokenistic. And, you know, a kind of an additional layer on that is everything that happens in terms of that support system also should be supported within the education system. You know, so it's kind of echoing what's been taught at home and the support systems that are there.
Understanding incel culture isn't just some academic exercise. It's crucial for addressing a deeply troubling reality that affects a lot of people. But by shining a light on these issues, we can start important conversations, offer support to those who feel isolated, and challenge the harmful narratives that fuel this ideology.
A strong video on a serious subject for every member of society. Sophie, how was it chatting to Dr. Sophie King and Claire Duffy?
It was really insightful. They both have so much empathy and understanding of these people, and I felt that the nuance was more than I had ever realised, and I was just really glad to be able to speak to people who knew more about it than I did.
Yeah, nuance is always a thing we here at SYFF try to expand upon. Both of you, have either of you encountered aspects of incel culture in your day-to-day lives?
I believe I'm mugging you right now, Sal. Yeah, in some ways. I mean, I think as you touched on in that film, incel terminology has actually sort of coupled itself with meme language. So it's really spread out across the internet in quite an insidious way. I wouldn't say that I've ever met an incel in person that I know of, but I would say that there are aspects of the internet, such as areas of YouTube and on Facebook and such, that for a young man growing up could take you down quite a dangerous path in some ways. So yeah, in that sense, I've stood at the top of the rabbit hole, I guess.
Interesting. And you, Sophie?
I've been lucky enough to never meet an incel nor have to have any real serious misogyny directed at me, more than a little bit of condescension. But in school especially, there are some boys that you can tell are sort of teetering on the edge of falling down the rabbit hole, which is mostly distressing if you're in class with them, because then they come out with all these terms like mogging and looksmaxing, and you've got no idea what they're talking about.
Interesting stuff. On a lighter note, earlier today, Rab spoke to Professor David Brune of the University of Glasgow on the topic of St Andrew's Day and how we might understand it within contemporary Scotland. Let's watch that now.
Professor, I'm aware that I think it's the Picts have something to do with St Andrew's origins as our patron saint, but what's the truth in that legend?
Well, so you're absolutely right. The first time we have St Andrew associated with Scotland is in Pictish times, and so the first phase of the legend of St Andrew and St Andrew's association with Scotland does take us to Pictish times, and it's a story about a king of the Picts who goes south and then gets into difficulties and appeals to St Andrew. Well, St Andrew comes in a vision, and in some versions of that story later on, of course, that's the saltire in the sky, and then rescues the king, and the king says, well, I will give a significant piece of my property to St Andrew. That's the first phase. The second phase is when we have St Andrew adopted as a patron saint for Scotland overall. And that's a gradual process, difficult to trace. It was in the 12th, 13th centuries when you've got a much greater sense of Latin Christendom, Western Europe, as an entity with shared beliefs, Christian, of course, and ways of being Christian, which means that there's a development of the authority of the Pope. So it's that sense of where does Scotland fit in internationally, and that's where St Andrew as the patron saint really comes to the fore.
So leading on what you had to say, St Andrew's Day obviously has origins in Scotland's Christian tradition.
Yes.
But it is presently our national day. Scotland at the moment is one of the most secular countries in Europe, I believe, and it's growing more secular. but it's also now host to many creeds, colours and religions. So do you think that Scotland needs to reimagine St Andrew's Day for the modern age, or that we need a new national day to preserve St Andrew's original Christian identity?
Well, and it's not unusual, very good question, it's not unusual to, of course, we think of St Patrick, have what were originally Christian, in the Middle Ages, when everybody was Christian in Scotland or in Ireland, so naturally it was, but then of course it's evolved over time. And that is certainly true for St Andrew's Day and would continue in the future. So it would only, I think, be exclusively religious if we were an exclusively Christian society, which we were in the Middle Ages, but as you say, we most certainly are not now. So I don't see that as diminishing the force of St Andrew as the national saint. It's about celebrating Scotland as a nation that's recognised in the world. So that's very important. The other thing is that for those who really want to dip into the history a bit more, that period which I talked about when St Andrew becomes the patron saint, becomes a unifying force, is also a period where the whole idea of what it was to be Scottish changed and became something that embraced the entire kingdom, and the fact that there were people of different ethnicities and different backgrounds.
I've got one last question. We're at the Festival of Politics here in the Scottish Parliament, so I wanted to ask something a bit broader relating to politics, so feel free to give a broad answer. What do you think are the ramifications of culture and tradition on Scottish politics? So within the devolution era and the reopening of our political institutions from 3 centuries ago, do you think we're at a crossroads in terms of our national identity going forward?
A really good and deep question. So national identity is something that's always alive, I think. Therefore, it means different things to different people. And that's, I think, an extremely healthy thing and something we can celebrate. Because at the end of the day, it is all about sharing the same space, the same country, coming from different perspectives. So if we see national identity as something that's constantly on the move, there isn't therefore going to be a crossroads. But in terms of national identity and culture and what it is to be Scottish, that is something I think that is meaningful because we engage with it. So the more we engage with it and think about it, the more it becomes real, interesting and alive.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much.
From Rob, I just want to say, by the way, well done. That was a really good piece.
Oh, thank you.
So, just give me a second. As a new Scot, I have to ask both of you, did you celebrate St Andrew's Day in your respective towns of Kilmarnock and St Andrews?
Well, I don't think I've ever celebrated it. We do usually have sometimes like a Burns supper, that's more our kind of thing, because, like Ayrshire, Robert Burns down that way. But yeah, I've never done St Andrew's Day.
It wasn't so much of a thing growing up for me either. But when I studied abroad for a year, it was actually quite a nice time for the Scots that were studying abroad to make a day of it. Even though we would never, back in Scotland, we had like a big dinner and stuck on some Jerry cinnamon and had Cranachan and all that. And yeah, I think there's a lot of potential for it to be more of a national day, but you're right that Burns Supper, I think, tends to take precedent.
Because of course, I'm half Mexican on my mum's side, and Dia de los Muertos is a really big deal in Mexico City. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, a James Bond film has even sparked a carnival. So
do you think we could have a James Bond sort of St Andrews themed?
Well, maybe if the next James Bond, which could be Jack Lowden.
Oh, yeah. Keep an eye on
it. Maybe if James Bond did a St Andrew's Day festival and was jumping off buildings and...
That's true. We need to come up with a festival first.
Jumping off buildings in Edinburgh, catching bad guys, seducing women.
Could have a big Saltire parachute.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows? We could have a St Andrew's Day festival in Edinburgh and maybe even climb up off the seat with that hamper and champagne that I've always wanted to do.
Oh, lovely.
Anyway, moving on, because we're nearly done with tonight's show, and it is the final show. And I'm gutted about that. I'm sure everybody else is here as well, because I've really enjoyed myself. We have prepared for you a little treat, and it's essentially of all of us screwing up. So, sit back, crack open a beer, and enjoy our blooper reel.
Éisgur maith is fáilte gan darna cúlach na héis politics. And you, ran sin aglaich, iolach, Jessic vi.
No. Right, cut from the top.
We were supported by climate change. No, what? 1 in 5 UK jobs will reportedly be impacted by moving to a cleaner.
Jack Loudon joined us today in the Holyrood room to discuss what? In tandem with his return to theatre in The Fifth Step, as well as Slow Horses series. Oh dear.
Cancer is responsible for 1 in 6 deaths. The research for
Making truth instrumental to one's political aims took form in this country's Southport riots, in which conspiracies...
Jack Loudon joined us today at the Holyrood room for the Festival of Politics to discuss his career, his new projects, as well as his views.
Since energy in the UK was privatised in 1989. Start again.
For example, the Southport riots that took place in this country, in which online conspiracies? Yeah. Okay, let me try again.
However, AI is so much more than just generating images or chatting with your favourite character online. It can also be used to detect early signs of disease, detect fraud.
Did you like it?
It's beautiful.
Oh, that's all. Bye, guys. Bye. It was nice to take you with us. Yes. Yeah, hopefully you liked it. But if not, it's okay. If not, you're lost.
Juliana, you look like you've given up on life there. Anyway.
We'll be uploading another behind-the-scenes video on the SYFF YouTube channel, so keep an eye out for that with the Scottish Youth Film Foundation to see what working with the Scottish Youth Film Foundation is really like. On behalf of everyone at SYFF and the Festival of Politics, thank you for tuning in this week, and thank you to the Energy Savings Trust Foundation for sponsoring this.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
See ya. Good night.